working on this 60 F250 4x4. I did manage to get the engine out. I guess I kind of dropped the ball on setting up a time lapse and pulling the motor out. It was a little bit of a cluster just because space in the garage. I had to, same thing as the other truck, I took it out from the side. Since it's a straight 6 and I left the radiator support in, it wasn't bad. Nothing got bent or anything. I just had to take another bracket off. I didn't think I needed to, but it came out pretty good. I wish I would have set the camera up, but give me a break. I'm still kind of new to this YouTube thing. I'm not used to setting up a camera every time I start working on stuff, so my bad. I did manage to go get the bolts and everything I need for this. So I ended up just getting grade 5 for the valve cover and intake manifold, and then I got grade 8 for all the bell housing and transmission bolts. The intake's just sitting on there. It's obviously not attached yet. I did, when you Google like a 302 valve cover torque specs, for some reason Google tells you 12 to 15 pounds, which immediately sounded completely incorrect, but I set it to like 10, and even 10 I was, as I was starting to crank them down, I'm like, yep, this doesn't feel right. So I backed them off, and then I did a little more digging, and they're supposed to be 5 to 8 foot-pounds. So obviously that felt much better. And then too, on these, cork gaskets, I know most guys don't like them. I've never really had a problem with them. The only time you really obviously have any kind of issues is, if you don't torque them to spec and you just crank down on the bolt. Like if this were just the stock steel valve cover, well, when you start tightening the bolt on a steel valve cover, it's gonna compress that valve cover at one single point. Like, one point is gonna be way tighter than it will the rest of the way. The aluminum ones are a lot better. When you tighten these bolts down, since the aluminum doesn't bend, it's a lot more rigid, so it puts more even pressure down on the gasket. But you got to be aware on like steel valve covers, when you're just tightening them down, if you start to see the gasket pooching out from the, from basically getting squeezed too hard in one point, and the gasket is actually being shoved out, you're toast. The gasket's gone. It's never going to seal right. And if you look all the way around on this, the gasket doesn't come out any farther at any point, because A, it's aluminum valve cover, so it's going to evenly distribute the force down on that gasket, but also I didn't just go crazy on tightening them, bottom it out and ruin the gasket, and then have oil leaks and be all pissed off about it. Like, you got to use some common sense. If that cork gasket's pooching at any point, it's toast. And another good example is on this oil pan. Obviously, steel oil pan, so exact same scenario. Cork gasket all the way. I did end up coating both sides of that cork gasket with some gasket maker, just in case. Just a real light film. And I just smeared it real light. I didn't want gasket maker dripping down, but on these old engines, you got all these junctions where you're meeting a bearing cap, so there's silicone between the bearing caps to keep oil from coming out, and then where the pan joins, this gasket around here is actually a rubber seal, and then it meets up with cork. So it's like, you know, I'm in here, I'm already having to silicone this joint. I just put a thin layer all the way down. And the front timing cover is the same thing. You have a solid rubber half seal there. Now on the timing cover you don't have the bearing meeting up, so it's a little bit different, but the little rubber seal goes in and the cork gasket kind of straddles it. And even in the repair manual it says to put some silicone at that joint and also at the joint where the timing cover meets. So I was just kind of redundant and did it all the way. See right here I put a little bit too much silicone, but that ain't gonna hurt nothing. So I am going to put the other valve cover on and put the intake on, and then I should be able to take this off the stand and start putting the flywheel, clutch assembly, bell housing on, and then I can slide the transmission into that and bolt that all together. Kind of hand tighten them down, or just lightly with a ratchet, just get them all kind of even, and then go around and torque them. I always like to go back and double check, and if you notice, this bolt was torqued. And I got another quarter turn out of it because as I was tightening down from inside to out, as another bolt tightens down, since this valve cover is so rigid, if I tighten this one and this one, that'll actually compress this farther, kind of loosening that bolt. I mean, the bolt didn't physically move, but that gasket compressed a little more underneath of it. Even this one, got about quarter turn out of that one, 8 turn out of that one, 16th or an 8th. And it's like once I've torqued them in sequence, I just like going around and double checking that they all finally, see, even that one turned a little bit more. Just because you torque them in sequence once doesn't mean they're all the same torque again. With a stamped steel valve cover, that's probably the case, but the rigid aluminum, not so much. I did the same thing on both, so I know they're tight. None of the gaskets pooched out. Nice and straight, nice and even, nice and tight. Should never leak. Alright guys, just noticed something I figured I'd point out. I am working with this Velcro gasket set. It's part number. And if you notice, sets like this come with several different gaskets. Like, obviously, there's one on there, and then there's two more, because cars could have used a different timing cover than trucks, changed it over years, whatever the case may be. You really need to make sure you take the time, stop what you're doing, make sure everything's the way it should be, because this set came with two different intake manifold gaskets. Okay, so just quickly looking at them, at first it's, okay, what's the big difference? They look pretty similar, but clearly they wouldn't put two different sets in just for fun. So Look on this side, okay. That lighter blue versus the gray. Okay, that looks like that matches up all the pores. This is a little port to let exhaust gas, equalize in the intake manifold. Kind of a preheater too, helps warm the carb up quicker. So it's like, okay, well the coolant passages, intake ports are the same on that. What is the main difference? So luckily I kind of noticed that on this one, if you reference up this one on top, the coolant passages are much bigger. Get a better look on it for you. Alright. So if you set this one down, put this one over it, and match up the holes. There's quite a bit more material on the blue one versus this. Now I just happen to notice, because mine are painted, if I can bring you in, show you what I noticed. So if I were to have run this gray gasket on here, that little dot of red, that's actually the block. You can see daylight. So if I would have put this gasket on, put it in the truck, wiped everything down, filled it full of coolant, it would have just been pouring coolant out of that coolant passage that runs through the intake manifold. So, I mean, easy fix, but you know, this type of stuff, when it's a gasket set like that, a company, it's not feasible for a company to make one gasket set for one exact vehicle. It's just make one kit that covers 20, 30 years, cars, trucks, just throw the extra gaskets in there. Yeah, they're selling you more product, but the parts interchange, the feasibility of having one package that covers more vehicles, I mean, it makes sense. So, but like I said, take your time, pay attention, and avoid some headaches. Alright, getting ready to put the intake manifold on. With these, they are a composite gasket on the sides, and then they have a little cork that goes here in the valley. And you want to make sure you put a little bit of a gasket maker here in the corners where those two gaskets actually meet, just to get a little extra insurance that it doesn't leak there. Just put a little bead, a little dot there, and then when you put the cork down, and I always just put another bead on the top side of it, so that way when the intake comes down on it, you're guaranteed that both sides are locked in on the corners, because that's going to be the place where it's most likely to leak. Basically, same kind of scenario as the valve covers. Run them all down by hand and then start torquing from the inside out.